The turnout is up. The turnout across the nation is up by 3.2%. Of the last three of the last four elections have had a lower turnout than this. People who suggested that the public was bored by past standards were wrong. Only on the very first register in February 74 have we had a higher turnout than this since 1964.
Well, we've got a declaration coming from the recount, I think, in Belfast East.
That was likely to produce a major electoral upset. The outgoing, I think we're going to the
I, being the Assistant Returning Officer for the constituency of Belfast East, hereby give notice that the total number of votes given for each candidate at the election was as follows. Agnew, Norman, 2017. Chambers, George, Hill,
Northern Ireland Labour Party.
982. Craig, William,
Official Unionist.
15,930. Napier, Oliver,
Alliance.
John, 15,066. Robinson, Peter, 15,994.
Paisley wins by 66.
So the Democratic Unionist Party, Ian Paisley's party, has taken that seat from the official Unionist Party, from Bill Craig, by just a handful of votes.
Second victory in the city of Belfast today.
Well, I hope we'll be able to hear from
Peter Robinson
Billy Flax, who was talking about the switch to the Paisleyite Unionists on the grounds that they were tougher on the control of terrorism and violence. But that is Bill Craig, who was been there as the MP, I think, since 1972, and who was a former founder and leader of the Vanguard movement, and was Home Affairs Minister in Stormont. And he is out, and the new candidate for Paisley's party, Peter Robinson. Now we have the result from Londonderry, which has been held by the official Unionists. There was a challenge there, the Alliance Party and the SDLP. The Republican clubs, Rep C standing for that. There's the original political wing supporting the IRA, an independent candidate, and the Irish Independence Party, the IIP, which came fourth. And we have an English result here, Wallsend. Swing Labour hold it, a safe seat, stronghold since 1945, and swing to the Conservatives there, 4.7%.
Rather a high swing for the North East.
And another result while we're about it, Conservatives holding on to a seat that's been Conservative since 1885, Kenneth Lewis's seat, and he's held that with a swing from Labour to the Conservatives of over 7%.
The high swing we've been having in the East Midlands.
And we've just got one more of these. Rother Valley, Labour's held with a majority of 26,000. This is a mining area, always been a Labour stronghold. Peter Hardy's been there since 1970.
But a very big swing there. Of course, there was a large number of Labour voters who could switch their votes. But it is one of the biggest swings we've had in the Yorkshire area.
Quite a big turnout. 306, Mrs. Thatcher has. 318, remember, is the moment when she will start making all kinds of announcements, no doubt, after she's been to Buckingham Palace about when we can expect government appointments and all the rest of it. Now, I think this might be a moment when we go to Robin Day, who's got one guest with him who I've only seen down a monitor for the past 4 weeks from Leeds, but who's now turned up in London. Well, welcome back to London anyway, Mr. Rees.
Thank you. Mr. Rees, I still address you as Home Secretary for at least the next 10 minutes, as I don't think your office has been handed back to the Queen.
That's absolutely right.
May I ask you this? Why do you think Labour lost the election?
You had me worried for a minute. I'm sure that the industrial disputes was an immediate reason for it, of the winter. I think that also one's got to take into account, it's not a new idea from me, that in 1974, we won it because large numbers of Conservatives voted Liberal. So I wonder sometimes whether there's been much of a basic change on the ground since...
Could we just go and look at the Prime Minister as he leaves to enter his official car to go to see Her Majesty the Queen and to tender his resignation?
Prime Minister and his private secretary, Ken Stowe, going in their official car to Buckingham Palace to tender his resignation to the Queen. After that, he will be going to the Labour Party headquarters at Transport House. This is the last time that he will leave Downing Street as Prime Minister, and the first time he's been seen since 7 o'clock this morning when he arrived in a rush. There were only 2 people on the pavement here when he arrived at 7 o'clock this morning. Now there's a crowd probably of about 1,000 or so, and it's growing all the time, as Mrs. Thatcher will be expected to come here within the next hour after she's kissed hands on appointment as the first woman Prime Minister in Britain.
We must keep this spot for her arrival.
And at Buckingham Palace, Her Majesty the Queen is waiting for the Prime Minister to come and tender his resignation. They will have a brief conversation. Her Majesty will thank the Prime Minister for his services, and then after what may not be a very prolonged discussion with her advisors, she will have her private secretary telephone to the Conservative Central Office or wherever Mrs. Thatcher is and ask her if she has a moment to spare to come along to Buckingham Palace, because the Queen would like to see her. I think that's how these things are done. And now we'll see Mr. Callaghan getting to the palace in just a moment, so forgive me if we interrupt again, Home Secretary. You may not be Home Secretary by the time we see it.
No, but that's not true, actually. It doesn't happen that way, but it doesn't matter. The thoughts...
When does it happen, as a matter of interest?
Well, it won't be until there's another appointment, as I understand it.
So if there's not a new Home Secretary till Sunday, you will still be in charge?
There are certain things that need doing on a daily basis, particularly as Home Secretary.
What might that be?
Well...
Giving an authorization for telephone tapping or some emergency matter? I didn't mean that in an offensive sense, but some immediate matter.
There are immediate matters.
Security matters.
Security matters.
I understand. May I ask you this? Do you think that the question of extremism in the Labour Party, and by extremism I don't mean people on the left, I mean people who have nothing in common with your kind of social democracy, a few of whom have got adopted as official Labour candidates in this election?
Do I think it's a problem?
Do I think it has been one factor in the reason for Mr. Callaghan's drive to Buckingham Palace?
No, I don't think it has. I don't think it is. The short answer, no.
You think the Labour Party's got to do something about it? Because some of our viewers may have forgotten that some years ago, under Gaitskell and under Attlee, members of organisations of this kind, Trotskyites and so on, were not allowed to be members of the Labour Party.
Well, what I believe firmly is that anybody that doesn't believe in the democratic socialist tradition should not be in the Labour Party. The question of whether it should be done by prescription is another matter. But I should tell you, I've been all round the country, not just in the last 3 weeks. It is not a major problem in the Labour Party.
What does the Parliamentary Labour Party look like to you in the coming Parliament? A more left-wing party or a less left-wing party?
Well, I'm not sure that the old terms really apply. Whether in some of the manifesto group young men, as well as those on the other side of the party, are not cast in the mould of the arguments of 20 or 30 years ago. We're not talking about the Tribune group of 20 or 30 years ago. We look back to Nye Bevan and to Hugh Gaitskell as great men, Dick Crossman also as an important man, but that's not what it's all about. There's a new generation.
Let me put it another way. Will this new generation be more likely to choose as a successor to Jim Callaghan a leader of the left, or a leader of what I must call, in somewhat crude terms, not the right, but what I might call your kind of centre of the Labour Party?
When the Prime Minister decides that he doesn't want to be leader, and I believe he will stay on as leader, so the timing is not an issue at the moment, in my view, as ever, the leader of the Labour Party will be in the centre, at times right of centre and sometimes left of centre. That's what the leader always is.
Is it for the Prime Minister, for Mr. Callaghan to decide whether he stays on as leader, or is it not a matter of annual re-election when in opposition?
It's annual re-election, but if the Prime Minister wishes to stay on, I hope he does, there will be no problem at all. He's fought a first-rate campaign. He was a first-rate Prime Minister. There will be no problem. It is a matter for Jim Callaghan, nobody else.
He may have fought a first-rate campaign, but he has lost, and he is 67.
Yes, I understand that. But as I can see it in the foreseeable future, there is not the slightest reason why Jim Callaghan should stay on if he wishes to do so.
Were you one of those who wanted to go in October?
No, I was one of those that didn't.
Were you right?
Well, you never know. I still think we were right, yes. But whether one, knowing what happened in the first months of this year, that is one of the major factors in the election, but I still think we were right.
Two leading trade unionists this morning, Mr. Rees, David Basnet and Tom Jackson, gave an assurance that the trade union movement would not use their industrial power for political ends in seeking to obstruct or sabotage the newly elected Conservative government. Now, can you form any opinion as whether they would in fact be able to conform to such an assurance and control their more militant members?
Well, I'm not surprised that they said that, because that's what always happens. What matters is that whether on the question of the law and the trade unions and how the government proceed on that, and I believe that what they've put forward is foolish. But they might then, if they proceed in that direction, have problems with the Labour Party and with the trade unions, but that's quite proper. It's on policy.
Do you, on behalf of the Parliamentary Labour Party, give an assurance that the Labour Party in opposition would condemn any attempt by any trade unionist who sought to defy the law, even if it was a law on industrial relations of which you disapproved?
The laws that are passed by Parliament are the laws of this country, and nobody has the right to avoid them and overcome them. They have every right to politically work against the passing of that legislation to prove that it's wrong, but we are a democratic country. We've just gone through the general election. It's the people that decide what government is in power and what they then decide what the law should be. But if they act foolishly, we have every right to argue against them, but not to obey the law is not in the tradition of the Labour Party.
Finally, Mr. Rees, what is your feeling in your heart at the moment? Do you feel angry? Do you feel deeply disappointed? Or do you feel that this was coming, you had it coming, and you hope that a Conservative government will do well?
I hope the Conservative government will do well. No reason for not saying that, of course. Disappointed? Yes. I'm not sure. 3 or 4 weeks ago, I didn't think we stood a chance. Last week, as a result of the campaign, I thought we did stand a chance. But a new government has been elected by the people of this country. We want to be elected next time, and we have to accept the verdict of the people. That's what the British Labour Party is all about.
There speaks the man who is Secretary of State for Home Affairs, is the guardian of the Constitution under our system. David Dimbleby?
And outside Buckingham Palace there's a crowd gathered looking in. We think that the Prime Minister has already gone in there to tender his resignation to the Queen. But the crowd, frankly, is no different from the kind of crowd you'd see, rather less than the crowd you'd see for the changing of the guard any weekday morning. Doesn't seem to be many people have gone there to see this, almost this ceremonial handing over of power from one Prime Minister to another, from one political party to another. Mrs. Thatcher's seats in the new Parliament at present stand at 309. We're keeping a careful eye on them, and we will say the moment they go to 318, and that, quite properly, is the moment at which Mrs. Thatcher will accept that she's won, and clearly not until. But I wonder very much what's going on in the meantime in Whitehall among the civil servants, because in the last 2 elections the civil servants were not expecting a change of government and got one, and everything was all a flurry and a fluster. But this time I suspect they've been prepared for the possibility of a Conservative victory. They must have thought it was the least likely, and they perhaps have made their plans already, or indeed some would say laid their booby traps already. David, you know Whitehall well.
They've done quite a lot of thinking about this. There's no pageantry about the changing of power. like the changing of the guard, but there is an awful lot of hard work. And I'm quite certain that there are detailed position papers in almost every ministry, and they're thinking about who's going to be appointed and how to handle them and how to brief them quickly so that there aren't messes, because civil servants want strong ministers, they want well-briefed ministers, because then they'll fight for their department in cabinet.
Well, of course, the Prime Minister and other ministers were always arguing that nowadays so much information was public about the way that the economy, for instance, one of the key things that Sir Geoffrey Howe presumably will be taking over, was so well known that the old business of being shown the books as though you were buying something sight unseen was no longer true, and that really everybody knew, broadly speaking, how things stood, and that this was just a political smokescreen that Sir Geoffrey Howe was putting up. Now, do you accept that, or do you think that when they go into the Treasury they're going to find in that time-honoured thing, when we came to see the books, like Harold Wilson said, when we came to see the books, my goodness, what did we find?
Life is very different when you're inside any job from outside. Being a minister is a very complicated job, and the civil servants have got to educate their ministers. Even if they're strong ministers who have strong views, a different party policy, a change of course, they still need to learn an enormous amount about the routine. Relatively few of the Conservative ministers have actually been in the top jobs. So quite a few ex-cabinet ministers and ex-ministers who will be in the Conservative team, almost every member of the Conservative cabinet will have had some ministerial office. But they still will be new to the actual jobs they're doing, and their civil servants will want to talk to them and explain things to them and give them things to lead themselves into the job.
I think it's also true to say it's very unlikely that there'll be any sudden turnabout in policy, particularly on the economy. I mean, there's been the promise of some tax cuts. I think the only immediate promise is of tax cuts at the higher level in the next budget. But in fact, if you look at the state of the economy at the moment, and the public sector borrowing requirement, and the cuts that have already been made by the Labour government in public spending, there's no room actually to start changing the economy for at least a year or two. 1981, I think.
Well, there are things that can be started, but at the same time, I don't think Mrs. Thatcher or the Conservatives have the 100 days illusion. There was this bad time when Kennedy said in 1961 he'd do things in the first 100 days. Harold Wilson said he'd do things in the first 100 days. And in retrospect, I think both thought that it had been a mistake to have that flurried opening. If they're going to be there for 4 years, they can go slow at the beginning on almost all issues. And many people think some of the worst things that Mr. Heath did, Mr. Heath's government did, were the instant dismantling of things. One of the notable things about the Conservatives during the election and running up to it, that they made relatively few explicit promises about changing organizations. They get obviously a different course, a different emphasis, but they didn't actually promise to abolish things and make the kind of promises like the museum charges, which caused so much trouble to so little benefit to the Conservatives in 70, 71, 72.
But it'll be fascinating to see how they do fulfill the promises, because a lot of those promises, while fair enough, you don't say exactly what you're going to do, when you actually come to make them, a lot of them have got to be tough choices. I mean, it may not be museum charges, but there was a lot of talk about whether school meals, for instance, would go up during the campaign. I mean, it's not possible to painlessly make cuts. People do get thrown out of work, and if in the long run, as Mrs. Thatcher believes, you've got to make some transference of resources from the public to the private sector, there's going to be a period when people get hurt, isn't there?
There's always that problem of
There's a wonderful
change.
coach, let's just see it, there's a wonderful coach coming out. Now, that's the kind of carriage that takes ambassadors, not prime ministers, to the Queen. I think that one's empty. Well, that would be a rather more elegant way to go, wouldn't it, as Prime Minister?
It reminds me of one election day when the Queen was at Epsom, I think it was, as the changing of the guard took place. Ascot in 1970.
You may call it the changing of the guard. The changing of the Prime Minister took place.
Well, it is a changing of the guard in its own way.
And I remember it well because I was at Downing Street and there was a lot of talk about whether she would or wouldn't come back from Ascot. And some of the people around the Labour Party were irritated that she wouldn't come hot foot and miss the afternoon's racing to...
Well, I think some viewers enjoyed the racing scenes more than these.
There's a car now going in. Now, we were told originally that the Prime Minister had gone in. That may be the Prime Minister going in, that may be Mrs. Thatcher going in, but I don't think it would be. Everybody seems to have black cars today. There's a black Mercedes coming out and a black Rover just gone in, and I'm certain, I will bet my bottom dollar it wasn't Mrs. Thatcher, because she only has 311 seats, and I'm almost certain it wasn't. I think the car that went in, perhaps, might have been the Prime Minister's. But what fruitless speculation this all is. If we don't know, why don't we just shut up? I'm sure you may be saying that, and Robin Day is saying, "Hear, hear," from the far corner of the studio, and I don't blame him. Well, 311, we've got 45 more seats to come in.
and 7 to give Mrs. Thatcher a clear majority.
Now, I think we ought to, at this stage, go to Bob Mackenzie for a moment. We'll cut back. Oh, Bob isn't ready. Dear, oh dear. Bob has an essay on women in politics, that is, which he's going to give in a moment. But let's just go across to Transport House and to Vincent Hanna.
Well, David, as power passes, there's a flurry of excitement around Transport House, caused by the imminent arrival of the person who may now be Her Majesty's Leader of the Opposition. James Callaghan will be arriving in a few minutes. He will go into a back room. The officials here are much more forthcoming than they are at Smith Square, just 50 yards away, because, well, they've less to talk about, I suppose. He will go in and he will say goodbye and thank you to his party workers, and that will be a strictly private occasion, which the cameras will be excluded. He will then give a sort of press conference in which he will make his statement, presumably conceding defeat and making whatever announcements he wishes to make. We hope to put some questions to him at that time, and then he will get into his car and go to his Sussex farm. Those are the technical arrangements. It's all being conducted with an air of great civility and great politeness. Even we've had a dust cart, the same as Richard Kershaw did at Conservative Party headquarters, because food and drink have been coming in here as well. This is Vincent Hanna at Transport House.
And I think we better go up to Skipton, where on the balcony they're about to announce the result, and we'll discover whether the Liberals have managed to take this seat. This is the result from Skipton.
Ladies and gentlemen, the total number of votes given for each candidate at the election was as follows. Kathleen Clare Brooks, the Liberal candidate, 17,484. Brian Michael Selby, the Labour Party candidate, 4,632. John Grenville Bernard Watson, the Conservative candidate, 23,000.
Thanks very much.
Well, the Conservatives have taken that seat at Skipton, and that there's no question. The Liberal vote is the same as it was at the last election. Claire Brooks, on the left of the returning officer there, has the face of defeat, and a brilliant lady who always stirs up the Liberal Party conferences with loud and noisy speeches, fought her campaign and has seen the Tories go way ahead. A swing from Liberals to the Conservatives of 5.6%, and that recount that we had from Skipton must, I think, have been a recount for Labour, seeking to avoid his deposit, losing his deposit, and in fact he has lost his deposit. And we've just heard news that Shirley Williams has lost, that Shirley Williams is out. We'll have details of that in just a moment. Well, we saw Shirley Williams talking to Robin Day a moment ago and saying that she was the only one left on the redoubt there, and
needed a 7.2% swing to push her out, and apparently it's happened there.
The Secretary of State for Education in this Labour government.
The first minister to be defeated, since Gordon Campbell was defeated in February 1974.
So we'll have the result from Shirley Williams. She'll be much missed by people on all sides of the party, I think. Very much admired and one time thought to be a possible leader. Her career, of course, in politics by no means over because of this defeat, but it must be a very hard blow to take.
She's the 22nd cabinet minister to be defeated in this century while holding office.
This was the full result from Skipton. Let's just see that, the one that the Conservatives held. Well, we don't have it just for a moment. We'll wait for Shirley Williams' result. There was no recount, was there?
There was no report of a recount. One doesn't always know about this.
This is the Skipton result, anyway, which the Conservatives held. This is a new candidate, John Watson, who used to be a chairman of the Young Conservatives and who was an assistant, a political assistant to Mr. Heath, and a member of the Tory Reform Group on the moderate left wing of the Tory party. It's been a marginal Tory seat since February 74. It used to be a safe seat in the moorland area there.
The third highest turnout in the whole country there in Skipton, 84.1%.
Very high turnout. Well, let's just have a look at the state of the parties. Mrs. Thatcher is at 313 after 592 results are in. And the prediction, which, despite the strictures that have at times descended on it, has proved remarkably accurate from our computer through the evening, of a Conservative 339 seats at this election. And that's an overall majority of 43. Well,
that showed the Liberals at, and that was the forecast, Liberals 11, including the one seat they haven't heard from in Orkney.
Well, we're still waiting for the result from Shirley Williams. We got that news very fast. We have the figure in a moment, and her old opponent, Mr. Norman St. John Stevens, who was shadowing her at education until he became shadow leader of the House, has just arrived in our studio, and no doubt we'll be able to talk about that in just a moment. We've got another result. Let's have this. Harborough, held by the Conservatives, with a swing from Labour to the Conservatives of 6%. This is just to the east of Leicester, and the Liberals go third. They were second, and they go down to third. National Front, 1% or a bit of the poll. We think that Shirley Williams had about 1,000 majority against her. She was defeated by about 1,000 votes.
Must have been much above average swing in that bit of Hertfordshire.
We've got another result from mid-Oxfordshire, Conservative seat. Douglas Hurd, author, close friend and colleague of Mr. Heath, and wrote a very interesting book about Mr. Heath's time in government, but he's now an opposition spokesman, Foreign and Commonwealth Office, and the sort of person who might well be getting, almost certainly be getting, a ministerial post. A swing to the Conservatives of 7% there. And we have Durham, held by Labour, safe seat, a swing to the Conservatives there. We've had one or two of that sort of size, haven't we now?
Yes, there were 3 or 4, yes.
7.4%.
Mining seats, there have been rather higher than average swings in the country as a whole, I think.
Well, we're still waiting on the Shirley Williams result, but what we can say is that Shirley Williams is out, has been defeated by 1,000 votes in a seat where she needed a 7% swing. So if she's been defeated by 1,000, it's almost an 8%, I suppose, swinging against her, something like that.
Yes, because it's a very large constituency, so the figures are slightly different from other places. About 100,000 voters in Hertford and Stevenage.
315. Mrs. Thatcher has 16, 17, 18. 3 more to go.
40 seats to come.
Look, you see, the computer can do it, but slower than I can do it on my fingers. 3 seats to go before Mrs. Thatcher has the overall majority that will take her to Buckingham Palace. And here is the full result. Hertford and Stevenage, the defeat of the Minister, Secretary of State for Education, Shirley Williams. The Conservatives take the seat with a majority of 1,290 on a swing from Labour to the Conservatives of 8.1%. And maybe on that note we should go across to Robin, who has 2 new guests with him. Robin?
Yes, if Lady Falkender will forgive me for a moment, I'd like to ask Norman St. John Stevens, who will almost certainly be in Mrs. Thatcher's cabinet, what comment he has on that rather surprising defeat of Mrs. Shirley Williams, because I know, although you're a political opponent, you have some admiration for her.
I have. Of course, I'm glad to see another Conservative seat, but I'm very sorry to see Shirley defeated, that is speaking personally, because I had a great admiration for her. We were on opposite sides of the Commons. We debated very fiercely, but she is a marvellous person. She is one of the most honest and sincere people in politics, and I'm very sorry that she's lost her seat, because she's a loss to British political life, and I hope she'll soon be back in the Commons.
Do you think that it was her education policy which helped to make her swing 8.1 to the Conservatives?
I think it could certainly be a contributory factor. I found in my own constituency the issue of the grammar schools was of overwhelming importance amongst the mothers, and I was amazed at every school I went to, the primary schools, talking to them outside, to preserve the grammar schools ranked first among the political issues on which they were voting. I knew it was important. I didn't know it was as important as that.
Turning to the new Prime Minister, whom, of course, you know very well, do you, knowing her well, do you expect her to announce her first 2 or 3 major appointments tonight?
My heavens, it's an interesting question, but I've simply no idea.
May I put to you what Sir Barry Heath said earlier in the day?
Any relation?
As you know, a great industrialist, chairman of GKN, who said that his first piece of advice to the incoming Conservative government would be not to rush ahead with legislation restricting and curbing trade union activities, to try first to do it by persuasion, if at all possible.
Well, the people to give advice to Mrs. Thatcher on that matter, not Sir Barry Heath, but the members of her cabinet. I think what is vitally important is that we as a party should keep our election pledges, because one of the reasons we won the election was on our policy of moderate trade union reform. In the manner of doing it, I hope we shall consult very closely with the unions.
Do you, well, let me put to you Mr. Hattersley's comment earlier this morning that the Conservatives won in spite of Mrs. Thatcher and not because of her.
I think that is as the sort of comment one would expect from Mr. Hattersley, ungenerous and inaccurate. Mrs. Thatcher fought a wonderful campaign. I found that on the doorsteps where the election is won, she had made immense progress with people. I think you couldn't fault her during the campaign. She ended the campaign a much bigger national figure than she entered it.
Would you expect, I know you don't know, but would you expect that Mr. Edward Heath would be offered a senior post in Mrs. Thatcher's administration?
That, of course, is a matter for Mrs. Thatcher, but I have always regarded the Conservative Party as a comprehensive party. We are a church rather than a sect. I think the more strands of conservative opinion that can be included in the administration, the stronger it will be. But I must emphasize at this point, it is a matter entirely for the new Prime Minister, and it would be impertinent of me, or indeed anyone else, to offer her advice.
I know you wouldn't ever be impertinent or ever offer her advice in public, but would you be happier if Mr. Heath were in the government or were not in the government?
As I say, I'm very happy. Bring everyone in. I would like to see Lady Falkender in the government if that were possible.
Well, that is a possibility which you'll forgive me for not exploring at this particular time, though I'm coming to her in just a moment. And in fact, I think I just wanted to ask you, how do you think your talents, which are, of course, immeasurable, and you can take that either way you like,
I take everything.
Margaret Thatcher is now the Prime Minister of Great Britain with an overall majority. Norman?
Well, I'm delighted to hear this. This is a wonderful day. First of all, for Britain, that's the most important thing. It's a wonderful day for her. We must rejoice and be happy when the sun shines. We mustn't be angry at the sun.
Lady Falkender, may I call you Marcia?
Please do, Robin.
Where will it all end?
What are your... Be quiet, Norman. I'm talking to Lady Falkender, who takes precedence over you. She's a baroness in the United Kingdom.
Yes, thank you very much.
Marcia, what's your reaction to the news that we have the first woman Prime Minister, politics apart?
Well, politics apart, of course, it's a very dramatic and exciting day. I think, to be fair to her, she's fought a very good battle. Whether she's a man or a woman is irrelevant in that sense. She has been very courageous. She's put up a very good show, a very good fight, and you couldn't put fault her on that, whatever your politics are. There's no doubt about it.
There was a report in one Sunday newspaper which seemed to assume that you were... As a peer, you had a vote in parliamentary elections, that you were going to vote Labour. That's as a matter of interest within these four walls. How would you have voted had you had a vote?
I thought you were going to ask me that, actually, Robin. I'm not quite sure. I might have actually have voted for the Ecology Party. I might have opted out altogether.
You've written some fascinating material about moving into number 10. Yes. Which is going to happen in just a few... Yes, there is a car, and I don't know whether it's the Prime Minister coming back from Buckingham Palace, and he's going to Transport House to say thank you to his dejected workers and to wish them well, and then go to the country. We may see him at Transport House in just a moment as he goes round the Victoria Memorial. And may I now come back to Mrs. Thatcher and ask, sorry, to Lady Falkender about Mrs. Thatcher moving to number 10. You've written about this. Isn't the first thing that happens, I understand, the first document that an incoming Prime Minister has to sign is a document put in front of him by a civil servant or her by a civil servant that he can go and use checkers for the weekend?
Yes, that's one of the first things. It's a courtesy act. You give the outgoing
Mr.
private...
Callahan's not taking advantage of him.
Is he not? He's
no, he's going down to his farm in Hussey. You also say that Mrs. Thatcher will find herself in a male-oriented place in Downing Street.
Well, the senior civil servants there are all male. There are very few senior women political secretaries or civil servants who are female. It's a building, really, where most of the senior people are men. So it's going to be very strange, I think, to find a woman in control. I don't think she's going to have a problem. She'll feel perfectly at ease with it. The problem I have in my mind is how easy they're going to feel having a woman looking after them, and I think that that may be a little uncomfortable for them.
What did you mean when you said in a most interesting article, if Mrs. Thatcher gets a big enough majority to do what she wants, she could well help to bring the people back closer to central government?
Well, I think that she's a great communicator. She knows how to keep in touch with people. She's proved on this campaign of hers that she really can get around the country and make personal contact in a very effective way.
You also make a number of fascinating revelations about the accommodation at number 10, as to which, whether there's I understand there's a big bed and a little bed, which is available in the Prime Minister's personal quarters.
In the private flat where the family live, there's a very large bedroom, which is usually used by both. But the wife often ended up in it alone because her husband was too busy working on state papers or with engagements. Well, there is a curious situation arising now, whether Dennis will end up there by himself and Margaret Thatcher will go into the little room, or which way round it will be. It's an interesting new situation we have. Who has the big bed?
And you say there's also a problem about officials continually bringing in papers to the private quarters, and they might knock at an awkward moment.
Yes, because you must remember that this is an office, a place of work. This isn't a place really where you have a home. Yes. And all the time, right through the day and night, they bring in boxes and official papers. So if you're wandering around in your negligee or whatever, yes, you could be caught out.
Yes. I can understand.
Can you? That really would be something, Robin, to find you in your negligee.
Norman, I did tell you, I know you're now about to be one of our rulers, but would you please keep quiet while I'm talking?
I've had my say.
We've come on to something even more fascinating.
My last moment of freedom.
As an example, and you must remember not to call her the Blessed Margaret anymore.
Never. Banned.
Saint
Margaret, now she's in number 10.
If I may have a moment. You also say, Marcia, in your book and your article, you reveal as an example of the male domination of Downing Street that there isn't the ladies' lavatory near to the cabinet room, and that this is an example of how Mrs. Thatcher will have to shake things up.
You're making me sound very trivial, you know, Robin.
Well, yes, what you also, I've got it all down here.
All right, I know, yes, absolutely right. Unfortunately, on that ground floor where the cabinet room is, there is a male lavatory right nearby, because there are more men in the cabinet than there are women, so the women have a long trek if they want to spend a penny. And it now is going to be a curious arrangement, I think. They can't have the Prime Minister trekking half a mile every time she wants to powder her nose.
I think I've just got a moment to ask you something else before I talk to Shirley Williams, who may be there for us in a moment, and that is, the civil servants have served for 11 out of the last 15 years Labour ministers, yes, both in Whitehall and Downing Street. Don't you think there's a danger that Mrs. Thatcher may find some of them Labour-minded for that reason, just as when you went in with Sir Hal Wilson in 1964, there's Mr. Callahan arriving at Transport House, you found them then anti-socialist?
Well, yes, in '64 it was a very bad atmosphere. They'd been there 13 years, and we were new, and they were mostly, I think, conservative.
You don't think Mrs. Thatcher may find some of the civil servants a bit socialist-minded, state-minded?
She may find a few who are, but I would still say that in the main they tend to be rather conservative.
What advice do you give to her, generally?
I don't think you need to give much advice to her. I think she's a very cool lady. I think she'll keep her cool, and I think that's the most important thing to remember there.
You also say what mesmerises most women, that she seems in such splendid condition.
Yes, I'm amazed at her health. I must say to you, that does absolutely baffle me. I wish I could feel as healthy as she looks. She doesn't seem to lose any stamina. It must be the adrenaline flowing the whole time.
Thank you.
Enormous stamina.
Thank you very much indeed, and for giving us such an interesting interview. And may I say that Norman St. John Stevens also seems in relatively splendid condition.
Thank you, Robin, for that unsolicited tribute.
Well, heavy political interviewing this afternoon, and all the details of the plumbing at number 10 as well that Mrs. Thatcher will face. But what we do know now is, and what we have seen while Robin was talking, is that Mrs. Thatcher has 319 seats now in the new House of Commons, that Mr. Callaghan is no longer Prime Minister, as he drove out of Buckingham Palace. He had given up the premiership, and that Mrs. Thatcher will soon be on her way there to kiss hands with the Queen on her appointment. That the Liberals, incidentally, have reached 4 million, and that if Lady Falkender votes for the Ecology Party, they will have 37,154 as opposed to 37,153 votes. And that's how things stand. In a moment, I think we're going to see Shirley Williams on that riverbank once again. They're waiting for her down there. Now, in the meantime, Bob, are you or are you not going to tell us about women in politics?
Yes, I am. But
you're not. You're definitely not, they tell me upstairs. Even though you wish to, you're definitely not.
No, but we will do it in a few seconds.
Yes,
but I think it's important, as this very graceful transfer of power takes place, to pause for a moment and realize there are about 20 or 25 countries in the world where this happens like this. And there are 150 countries in the world, and most of them are dictatorships, autocracies, military governors, all the rest. And I think we ought to pause and respect the fact that this is a great and exciting moment when, without any murmur, supreme power is laid down by one lot of chaps, picked up by another. And it's a rare thing.
But I mean, it's what happens in any other parliamentary democracy.
Yeah, there only are 20 or 25. You didn't know that.
I see what you mean.
Yes, and I'm just saying there are few, but the great part of the world, people don't transfer power without being overthrown, destroyed one way or the other. And it's something that's taken a long time to evolve in history, and we have one lucky opportunity to witness it happening again now.
Well, we should soon be seeing Mrs. Thatcher on her way to Buckingham Palace. And we're still waiting for Shirley Williams. And we're still waiting for Bob Mackenzie and his analysis of women, which I'm looking forward to. But I think perhaps before we do that, we'd better just summarize the many developments there have been in this last hour, including the defeat of Shirley Williams at her constituency by 1,000 votes, and Mrs. Falkender, Lady Falkender I should call her, and Norman St. John Stevens talking here about their view. Norman St. John Stevens, I don't suppose this will be in the news bulletin, saying that in future Mrs. Thatcher is to be called Saint Margaret after her victory, and that he's never to speak like that about her again. Angela.
Well, 5 weeks and a day after he called this general election, Mr. Callaghan has gone again to see Her Majesty the Queen. On March the 29th, it was to ask her to dissolve Parliament. Today, in the last half hour, he was there to tender his government's resignation. Now, his own hours in office are drawing to a close. They give way to a new era in British politics, a Conservative government headed by the Western world's first woman Prime Minister. Mr. Callaghan had formally conceded defeat an hour before he went to the palace. He did so with the knowledge that the Conservatives were well on their way to a comfortable majority in the new Parliament. Well, Mr. Callaghan will be followed to the palace by Mrs. Thatcher, and she'll be asked to form the next government. Apparently, she doesn't intend to move into 10 Downing Street until tomorrow. In the meantime, her fast-moving day of triumph, the Tory leader has been showing little sign of tiredness in spite of a night without sleep. One of the many celebrations, a champagne reception among party workers at Conservative headquarters. She told them it really has been great fun, every single thing we asked for. A jubilant and light-hearted occasion before Mrs. Thatcher begins her task of forming a new government and leading the country to what she calls a new beginning. Well, one man to whom Mrs. Thatcher's triumph has been of particular satisfaction is surely Sir Keith Joseph, her chief policy advisor. But Sir Keith had no doubt where the credit for Tory's success lay when he spoke earlier today to Robin Day in the studio.
Can I ask you to comment on a statement made a few moments ago by Mr. Roy Hattersley, who's still sitting here beside you, that the Conservatives won in spite of Margaret Thatcher and not because of her?
Oh, I think that's less than generous of Roy Hattersley. Margaret Thatcher has presented the policy, she has presided over the formulation of the policies, she has set her stamp upon the policies, she has presented the policies time and time again. Our victory has flowed from Margaret Thatcher's courage, patriotism, and clarity of speaking.
Well, trade union reaction to the Conservative win has been predictably unenthusiastic, if not worse. The engineering workers leader, Mr. Terry Duffy, said Britain had dropped a winning team in Labour. And he said the TUC Concordat was now a dead document, though that didn't mean that the unions were collision-bound with the Tories.
Mrs. Thatcher, I think, Mrs. Thatcher is leaving on her way. Yes, there she is, with her husband behind her. Mrs. Thatcher on her way now to Buckingham Palace. And Michael Charlton just in the corner of the doorway. Perhaps we can hear from him.
Constitutionally confirmed. So she leaves enormous cheers inside Central Office, and in the new dignity of her leadership of the country, gets into her official car. With her was her husband, Dennis Thatcher, driver of the car. George Newell has been her driver as leader of the opposition, will be her driver as Prime Minister, and was also Edward Heath's driver. No doubt if he's watching, he'll remember too the time not so long ago, it must seem to him, when he set out in similar personal triumph as leader of the Conservative Party, Prime Minister of the country, as Mrs. Thatcher herself, his successor, is now doing.
And my eardrums are being broken in the process.
Shirley, here I am again.
Robin. Robin?
Yes, it is. Thank you for talking to us again at this moment of your disappointment.
Well, don't worry.
Do you think that your defeat was just part of the general swing which is now taking Mrs. Thatcher at this moment in her car to Buckingham Palace to be appointed Prime Minister, or do you think there were special factors about your education policy which contributed to the...
No, I don't think that, because in fact in Bolton, where we won, I went up specifically to address a meeting about education policy. No, I think it's a straight phenomenon of the prosperous southeast reaction. And Hertfordshire has gone very badly for us, and my seat has gone along with Hertfordshire.
Do you think that your defeat is bad for the balance of power, if I may put it that way, in the parliamentary Labour Party, which, according to some people at any rate, needs moderates of your kind to strengthen the moderate side of the Labour Party?
Oh, it's not for me to judge, Robin. I think there will be many very powerful, good voices for that side of the party coming back into Parliament.
Did you expect this?
No, not really. I think I thought it was very close, but I must congratulate my Conservative opponent. It's been a very good result for him.
But it's still rather puzzling, because you're, if I may say so, a most attractive campaigner, as well as being an attractive lady. You were on television a great deal,
yes.
And you were doing party election broadcasts, and therefore one would have thought that you would have relatively little difficulty.
Well, we put up our Labour vote, but the truth of the matter is that the Conservative Party picked up, I think, most of the higher participation in this constituency, which went up by about 6%, and they also seem to have picked up the decline in the Liberal vote, which seems to have largely swung to them. So I'm pleased with my own supporters and my own voters and my own workers. We have put up our vote by about 1,000, but it wasn't enough to offset the effect of the decline in the Liberal vote and the rise in the overall level of voting.
May I have the pleasure of transmitting to you a comment made just now by Norman St John Stevens, who is still in the studio with me,
yes.
Who said that although he was very pleased that there was another Conservative Member of Parliament, he was personally very sorry to hear of your defeat because he has the most high regard and affection for you.
Well, please say to Norman that that was as elegantly put as ever.
I think he put it even more elegantly than I did. Do you want a word, Norman?
Yes, I think, Shirley, you are marvellous in defeat, and I hope you'll soon be back in the House of Commons, because not only the parliamentary party needs you, but the country needs you.
Well, Norman, I shall regret our exchanges across the House of Commons, and thank you very much indeed.
Will you seek to get back in the House of Commons, Shirley?
Oh, give me a chance to sleep before I think about these things.
I'm sorry, I withdraw the question, but Your friend Merlin Rees, who is still technically Home Secretary, but not for much longer, wants a word with you.
Oh, all right, fine.
Shirley.
Yes, Merlin, love. How are you?
I'm fine.
You did very well, congratulations.
Well, that's fine. Shirley, have some sleep.
Yes.
And then get back into the House of Commons quickly.
Well, anyway, well done yourself and congratulations.
Shirley, thank you again for talking with us.
Okay, Robin.
Good afternoon.
Bye-bye, we'll live to fight another day.
That's right.
Bye then. Okay.
A very nice, brave face from Shirley Williams in the face of that defeat. A rather touching reaction to what must be a very painful defeat at the hands of the Conservatives there for her. And we went away from that in the middle of Angela, who was reading the news, and so I think we might perhaps go back to that. I don't want to disturb your full flow, Angela. Let's go back to where you left off.
Well, when we left, in fact, what we were talking about was the trade union reaction today to Mrs. Thatcher's success, which, as we said, was predictably unenthusiastic. But whatever the unions may say about the future relations with the new government, well, the result has been welcomed by industrialists. The chairman of the 30,000-strong industry institute, of directors, Mr. Dennis Randolph, has prescribed support for a new government pledged to restore incentives, rewards, success, and so create new jobs. The group chairman of GKN, Sir Barry Heath, has urged Mrs. Thatcher to tread with caution in her relations with the unions.
One side of what I'm sure they're not going to do and what they mustn't do is to rush in and try and bring in laws regarding the restriction on trade unions and all the bogies that the Labour Party have said will be absolute the death knell to industry in this country.
Well, north of the border, the election has all but wiped out the Scottish National Party. They've lost 9 of their 11 seats. Their leader, Donald Stewart, saw this parliamentary strength reduced to 2. In his own seat, the Western Isles, he held on despite an 8-point swing against him. The only other SNP seat was held at Dundee East, where Gordon Wilson survived despite a big cut in his majority. The former communist Jimmy Reid came second for Labour there. Among the SNP casualties was Margaret Bain, defending the country's smallest majority, just 22 votes at Dumbarton East. She was pushed into 3rd place. Plaid Cymru will also have 2 seats in the new parliament. Their leader, Gwynfor Evans, lost at Carnarvon. He was their first ever MP 13 years ago. For the Liberals, it's been an election of wildly contrasting fortunes. Jeremy Thorpe saw a 6,500 majority overturned in North Devon for a Tory gain, and Deputy Leader John Pardo lost at North Cornwall in one of the biggest upsets of the whole election for Liberal. In contrast, David Penhaligon produced a 6% Liberal swing to change Truro from a marginal to a Liberal stronghold with an 8,000-plus majority. Party leader David Steele, Cyril Smith and Clement Freud, among others, all held their seats. Well, the results from Northern Ireland were among the last to come in. When they did, the official unionists suffered 2 blows. Mr. William Craig lost Belfast East to the Democratic Unionist Party. Mr. Craig had been MP there since 1972. And at Belfast North, another gain for the Democratic Unionist Party, also from the official unionists. The Democratic Unionist Party is, of course, led by the Reverend Ian Paisley. Well, at Belfast West, the SDLP leader, Mr. Jerry Fitch, retained his seat with an increased majority.
There are times in one's political life when one is inclined to feel depressed and fed up, such as I felt throughout this campaign when one of my opponents used every nasty trick in the political almanac to try to impugn my integrity and honesty. I never replied, but there are times when one feels elated and grateful and indeed very humble. And I felt that yesterday as I went around the constituency of West Belfast and saw all the old people, the infirm people, all the others, the unemployed and the homeless, all rallying into the polling stations to ensure that I would be standing here today.
Overall, the fringe parties made virtually no impact on the electorate at all. The National Front, despite the controversy caused by their campaign, lost every deposit. John Tyndall, the party chairman, trailed down the field at Hackney South, and Martin Webster fared no better at Bethnal Green. The Communist Workers' Revolutionary Party and the newly formed Ecologists collected no more than a handful of votes between them. Well, if we know who the happiest woman in Britain is today, what about the happiest man, apart, that is, from Mr. Thatcher, of course? Well, how about Mr. Tony Barlow, a businessman from Epsom in Surrey? Now, he's the man who bet £30,000 on a Tory victory. Well, this afternoon, he got his reward, an outsized cheque from his bookies for £43,000, presented where else but in Downing Street.
Thank you. Mr. Barlow, you won £43,000 on the Conservative victory. How did you manage that?
Well, I put £30,000 on the Conservatives to have an overall majority. Immediately, the no confidence vote had been announced.
So of the £43,000 that you won, £30,000 is actually your own money?
Yes, that's right.
Where did you get £30,000 to put on a political bet?
Well, I play the stock market and sort of almost semi-professional gambling, so I've usually got a bit of money in reserve in case opportunities like this arise, where I think the odds are completely out of balance to the actual probability of the event.
Well, finally, on this day of history-making by a woman, the news that one of Labour government's most highly respected ministers, Shirley Williams, has lost her seat at Stevenage. The Education Secretary's majority of 9,000 was turned into a Conservative majority of just under 1,300. So, Mrs. Williams joins the list of Mr. Callaghan's colleagues who will not be joining him on the opposition benches.
And Mrs. Thatcher, a moment or two ago, in the black Rover there, with the flashing indicator light, waved at by the crowds, going into Buckingham Palace to kiss hands with the Queen on her appointment as the first woman Prime Minister of Great Britain. She's at the palace now, and we hope we'll be able to catch her as she comes out after her appointment. Now, we've got still a number of seats to come in. We've got 28 in all, and they're spread rather widely. We've got 6 to come in from Northern Ireland, 3 from Wales, 1 from Scotland, 5 from the North East, 7 still to come in from the Midlands, 2 from the South West, and 4 from the South East. And what are we looking for there, David, in the way of seats picked up?
Well, the only 2 seats of interest in Great Britain, there are still 6 seats to come from Northern Ireland, are, I think, Brecon, which the Conservatives might well win. It's a seat that's been getting better for them. And Blyth, where there's this fascinating contest where Eddie Milne, an ex-Labour man, it's a Labour versus Labour, and we'll have to see what happens there. We've had no indications or rumours about when it's coming.
Let's just have a look at Ian Paisley's result, which has just come in from Antrim North. It's held by Ian Paisley. The number of votes cast for him has dropped considerably because there's a new official unionist candidate who's taken 15,000 votes, so that Ian Paisley's share of the vote has dropped 20%, and his majority is down 29%.
But Ian Paisley must be feeling very pleased because Democratic Unionists have won 2 seats in Belfast, one by only 64 votes in a very tight three-cornered contest, the other much more amply in Belfast Belfast North.
I was just looking to see, we haven't had an official Unionist Party candidate returned yet, though Enoch Powell will certainly be returned, and I suppose others will too. We've got one more result come in, I think, just while I was talking. I'm not quite sure which it was. We'll see in a moment.
I think we did have one official unionist, didn't we, in Londonderry?
We did so, so. This is the state of the parties now. 608 results in, just after 3:15. And the Conservatives up 55 overall, Labour down 42. The SNP overall down 9, nearly wiped out altogether in the House of Commons. And the Liberals, with over 4 million popular votes, have only, at the end of the day, dropped 3 seats overall and have got 10 MPs in the new House, one of whom is sitting now in Manchester and about to talk to Robin Day.
Good afternoon, Cyril.
Good afternoon, Robin.
May I put to you, and I don't do so with any malice in my heart, but simply to invite you to comment on the reality of the situation, that you have not got the balance of power you hoped for. You've got only 4 million votes. Your percentage is down to about 13%. You've got fewer MPs with the loss of your deputy leader, the loss of your former leader, and the loss of your distinguished Home Affairs spokesman Emlyn Hooson. Is there anything that gives you satisfaction from the Liberal showing in this election?
Well, just hang on while I get my handkerchief out, will you? I mean, listening to that lot, you'd think we got absolutely slaughtered, which of course is what was forecast. There was one national newspaper last week that I think said we were in danger of losing all our seats, or about left with 2 of them. We set off the election with 8% in the opinion polls. We finished polling somewhere between 14 and 15%. We poll 4 million votes and have a miserable 11 seats. 4 million people voted for us, and we finish with 11 seats. In anybody's language, that is grossly unfair. And I would have thought that whilst we've not done as well as we had hoped, we've done certainly much better than had been forecast by virtually the whole of the media, from the right wing to the left wing of the British press.
How do you explain the fact that whereas by common consent, even among his opponents, David Steel fought a very brilliant and creditable campaign, that this wasn't reflected in the seats and the votes?
Well, as to whether or not it's reflected in the votes, that's a matter of opinion. It's not reflected in the seats, which was what all the argument was about. You may remember that David was saying in 20, 30, 40 seats, we want to concentrate the effort. The votes did not come in those seats. They came in good numbers, but not in good enough numbers. And the reason for that, of course, is first that there's a Conservative swing, and I compliment Mrs Thatcher, and I hope she does a good job, and I say that sincerely. But there was a Conservative swing. Many of the seats in which we had hoped to make gains were in fact where we were second to the Conservative rather than second to the Labour Party. So the whole thing, as it were, was against the strategy being a Conservative swing. And the final thing, of course, is that that we have an electoral system that doesn't allow most individuals to survive. And the miracle really is, Robin, that 11 of us have survived an electoral system.
But,
I mean, that is
but
really
on the electoral system, Cyril, as a realist...
And I'll bet if I'd asked you yesterday, you wouldn't have said we'd have the 11 MPs today.
Well, I'm not sure what I would have said, because I'm not very good at forecasting.
No.
But let me ask you this. As a realist, don't you think that you've got to say goodbye to any hope of getting proportional representation in the near future, because there's nothing to persuade Mrs Thatcher or anybody else to go for it now?
Well, of course, one of the problems with Mrs Thatcher is her total obstinacy about proportional representation.
And the same goes for the Labour Party, doesn't it?
No, it isn't, of course, because over 200 Labour MPs, in fact, voted for proportional representation for the European Assembly, so that is not true.
Hold on, Cyril, if you don't mind. I don't want to interrupt you, but I have to go to Transport House for a press conference with Ron Hayward.
Good Alliance to start the fight back. I personally will start it tomorrow with addressing the Kent Miners' rally at Margate, and we shall form the opposition. I believe, and we're prepared to take questions on this, I believe that we fought a good and vigorous campaign. In fact, some of you have been kind enough to say we won the campaign, but the campaign battle, but we lost the war on this occasion. I express some personal regrets that during the whole of my life, and I'll have been in this party 46 years next month, it seems to me that the British people only give Labour a chance when the country is in dire economic circumstances, first starting after the Second World War, with a good majority in 1945, and I've frequently stated on many public occasions that we do need a full decade of office, a full two years of office, 2 terms of office, before we can really look a Labour government in the face and say you've proceeded along the road to democratic socialism. We are democratic socialists, we believe in democracy, and therefore it would be churlish of us not to wish the government well, which we do, because not to do so would be to wish bad wishes on our own people in this country, which is the last thing we would like to do. I'm going to now call upon Jim Callaghan, who will have a few remarks to say to you, and then we are prepared to take some questions. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Callaghan.
First of all, I would like to offer our thanks, and mine in particular, to all the Labour candidates and to everybody who fought so hard and magnificently for us during this campaign. The spirit of those who I saw around the country was really remarkable, and it was that which gave us great encouragement as we went on day after day and week after week. also like to express my regret with some of our colleagues who will not be in the next House of Commons, but I am sure they will soon be back again. I think we told the truth. Certainly we tried to, as we saw it. You said that we had won most of the arguments but lost the fight. Well, obviously we didn't convince as many people as we should have done. And I think there were some underlying difficulties that did not wholly surface during the course of the campaign, as the results show. I would want to congratulate Mrs. Thatcher on becoming Prime Minister. It's a great office, a wonderful privilege, and for a woman to occupy that office is, I think, a tremendous moment in the country's history. And therefore everybody must, on behalf of all our people, wish her well and wish her success in the great responsibilities that now fall to her. And she will need health, she will need strength, she will need stamina, she will need a lot of support. But if she gets it, although we shall do our best to ensure we win the next election, then it will be for the benefit of all in our country. I do claim that what we're handing over to her trusteeship is better than the inheritance that we ourselves had. I do not think it can be denied that for whatever reason there is little room to doubt that the basic economic position is better than it was. Our balance of payments is better, and I've explained the reasons for that. It's not wholly due to North Sea oil. This coming government has got the great benefit of North Sea oil and its revenues to fortify what they are doing during the next 10 to 15 years, although of course I trust they're not going to last as long as that. But certainly during their next term of office they are going to find a Britain which will be totally self-supporting and whose revenues will be a tremendous boost to what they are doing. We have handed over a country in which inflation is not only substantially reduced but is under 10%, and I believe need not go up. I cannot say will not go up, but need not go up in any dramatic way, because the conditions that existed when we came to office in 1974 with the supply of printed money out of control do not exist today, and therefore it will be the responsibility of the new government to ensure that inflation does not rise and indeed is brought down lower than it is at the present time, which is the target that we had set ourselves. We also hand over a much more stable country in terms of the reserve assets. When we inherited in 1974, the reserves were some $7 billion. They are now treble that. They are $20 billion, and that gives any Chancellor of the Exchequer a much securer feeling as he lies in bed at night than when it is as low as it was when we took over. On growth, we would have thought, and I don't wish to refight the last election campaign, but you would have thought, listening to the speeches, that there had been no growth in this country last year. In fact, we were among the faster growers in the economy during last year. We grew at something like 3%. And, of course, unemployment has been going down, whereas it was going up. Now, all these things, I think, I don't say in order to underestimate the problems that are ahead of Britain. That wouldn't be true if I did, because I have been explaining during the last months the problems that still lie ahead. And they are many, and they are considerable. And the modernisation of our plant and the increase of the growth of our wealth are very important indeed. And I shall go on saying so, and will do my best to assist in any measures that the government introduces.
Well, we can hear the Prime Minister. I must say,
provided they fulfil one other condition. It is important, as has been emphasised by both sides in this campaign, that we should create wealth. It's also important that it should be fairly distributed. And I urge the new government to ensure that there is a social justice and that the increased wealth that can be created will be fairly and equitably shared. That is perhaps one area in which our policies are markedly different. I don't wish to emphasise the differences this afternoon, because the new government is entitled to a fair show on its voyage It's got plenty of difficulties that it will have to overcome without us unnecessarily adding to them by factitious opposition. We shall, of course, play a vigorous part in opposition. I hope it will not be opposition based on opposition for its own sake, but that it will be constructive criticism and practical ideas that we shall bring forward for the purpose of assisting the nation. So I would like to say in conclusion that I thank those of you who are still with me, who've been with me during the course of this campaign. You have all remarkable stamina, and you've endured it and survived it. I think we must now strike a medal for you all, and to say that I hope and believe that a good future lies ahead of this country. We can make a very fine country of this, and I hope we shall do so.
Well, there are going to be some questions to the Prime Minister, and if there's anything interesting in those replies, we'll have them for you a bit later on. And when he talks about remarkable stamina, it must be said that the most remarkable stamina perhaps is shown by the former Prime Minister himself at 67, who's spoken every single night of the campaign, a big major speech, and now, at the moment of his defeat, rather than do what he could, just get into his car and go off to the country, holds a press conference with as much confidence and firmness in his voice as the first press conference he held, and he's been holding them every day too at the beginning of this campaign. Wishing Mrs. Thatcher well, wishing her success. We go back there now because he's taking questions from journalists.
Tell us now what impelled you to carry on. The fact that I wanted to complete 5 years and we didn't do it. I thought that it was right that we should get through, if we could, this very difficult winter that we've had. But the memories of the winter, I think, have been too great for many people, and that has undoubtedly been a handicap to us.
Sir, it seems clear now that the main factor in turning the electorate against you was the winter of industrial discontent to which you've just referred. Do you accept now, would you concede that perhaps the Tories may have had an approach to industrial relations which was more popular with the public at large than the approach of your government?
I don't know whether the remedies were more popular. We shall wait and see. Indeed, we don't even know what remedies they're going to introduce. In my view, the ideas that they have put forward so far, although I don't wish to get into fighting the campaign, are little more than a cosmetic, and they won't deal with the fundamental issues. Now, I don't think it's because people thought that their remedies were better. It was because they were discontented with what had happened, and that, I think, is a very different matter. You frequently find that people vote against something rather than voting for something, and I have a feeling that people voted against last winter rather than voting for the Conservatives' proposals.
Just tell us something about your personal future. Do you intend to stay on as a leader of the Labour Party?
No, I can't discuss that today.
During the campaign, you gave a personal pledge, if you were re-elected as Prime Minister, that you would stay on for the lifetime of the Parliament. Can you tell us now how long you want to stay on as Leader of the Opposition?
I don't think you heard my answer to the same question that was asked. I have nothing to say, more to say than I said in answer to the last question on that.
Is this something that you can give any indication how you...
No, I see no reason why I should do so less than an hour after I've been to the palace and submitted my resignation to the Queen.
Can I ask your reaction to the defeat of Shirley Williams in Hoxton?
I'm heartbroken. She is one of the most distinguished post-war parliamentarians, members of the party, a woman with a great heart and an intellect, an imagination and a sympathy to match. But Shirley is very young. She will be back again, and I believe the most distinguished future for her. Not that she is looking for a career, but because she has a passionate belief in service to the community and to this party.
Mr. Callaghan, when I asked you last night in Cardiff what advice you had for Mrs. Thatcher at 5 o'clock in the morning, you said she should go to bed, which is where you were going. I wonder, she has only held one office of state, and that not even a major office. You have held all 4 major offices of state. What advice do you have now to her as Prime Minister?
I don't think it's for me to offer advice to an experienced politician who's just been elected as Prime Minister of this country, not on that kind of basis, really.
I wonder what you will most miss yourself being Prime Minister.
I'll tell you what I will most gain, if I can walk round the question that way, and it's a personal story. during the last 2 or 3 days of the campaign, Audrey was talking to my second daughter up in Cumbria, and all the children have been busy distributing handbills, and my 4-year-old grandson said, "I do hope Grandad doesn't become Prime Minister again, because he doesn't come and see us often enough now. That's what I shall gain."
Are you all finished? Well, I say thank you very much for the courteous way that we conducted the campaign with you. I promise you to read every word you write. I won't always promise to believe it, but may you long continue to write it.
Thank you all very much, especially those who've been round with me, and I apologise to everybody 16 times for all the errors of omission, commission, the bullying, the irritation that I have shown. Thank you all very much for putting up with it.
Quite a strange sight down there at Transport House as the Prime Minister apologises for what a lot of journalists have commented on, his occasional flashes of bad temper towards them during the campaign, and as Ron Hayward makes an absolutely typical end-of-campaign sally against the press for what they've written about Labour. The Prime Minister refusing to discuss, though, his own personal future, saying only that he looks forward to spending time with his family, but not giving any clue of what he's going to do, though seeming as robust and as strong-willed as ever at the end of a campaign which has ended in this defeat for him today. Nothing certain in politics. I suppose it's unlikely that Mr. Callaghan, who's now 67, will hang on for, 4 or 5 years of this new Parliament to lead the opposition through another election, though it is possible. But as Mr. Callaghan refuses to turn to thoughts of retirement today, Robert Mackenzie, at any rate, looks back on the events which led him down this road to defeat.
Well, Labour stalwarts will be arguing for years whether Mr. Callaghan missed the opportunity last autumn of calling an election that he could have won. Certainly when he spoke, or rather sang, to the TUC delegates in September, everyone thought he was about to go to the country.
There was I, waiting at the church. Perhaps you recall how it went on. All at once, he sent me round a note. Here's the very note. This is what he wrote. Can't get away to marry you today. My wife won't let me.
He didn't take the chance, and by the Labour Party conference the following month, the threat of a rough industrial winter was beginning to undermine Labour's relative popularity.
Society today is so organised that every individual group almost has the power to disrupt it. How is their power to be channeled into constructive channels? That's a question for the government. It's a question for the trade union movement too.
But that appeal was answered with a rash of strikes, with the lorry drivers' dispute in particular leading to calls for reform of trade union law.
Strike. Who are? The West Midlands. We are. We're on an official one. Well, who do we have to recognise then? Well, then surely you're not going to run over your own men. That's who you recognise. What do you mean? What about my his son? He's an owner driver. He's working.
Mr. Callaghan returned from the Guadeloupe summit to face demands that he declare a state of emergency.
I promise you that if you look at it from outside, and perhaps you're taking a rather parochial view at the moment, I don't think that other people in the world would share the view that there is mounting chaos.
As the strikes continued, the best bet for Mr. Callaghan seemed to be to hang on for a summer or autumn election, when memories of industrial disruption might have faded. But he needed the support of the Scottish National Party to stay in power. And after the indecisive March referendum, he wasn't prepared to do what the Nationalists wanted and try to bulldoze Scottish self-government through Parliament. During the election campaign, Mr. Callaghan has proved one of Labour's greatest assets. His popularity in the polls has been consistently ahead of Mrs. Thatcher's, even when his party was trailing hers badly. He has shown great confidence on the hustings in the Labour victory.
If you want to be photographed holding a calf the wrong way. They are obliged. But get them to discuss the issues. And all we have is a deathly silence. The truth is that this time,
Tory policies are being packaged as though they are selling Daz or Omen. And I say to the Conservative Party that they are insulting the intelligence of the British people by trying to sell a political vote.
I'm told I'm still calling him the Prime Minister. Mr. Callaghan, of course, is no longer the Prime Minister. Mrs. Thatcher we've not yet seen leaving Buckingham Palace, where she is becoming Prime Minister. We've got 22 results still to come in. The Conservatives have 324 seats at the moment, and it's going to go up to what, David, in the end? 338, I think, at least?
Well, 338 or 339. 14 on the
339.
Conservative-held seats, and there's Brecon and Radnor, which they might well win, which will be at stake, will make a difference to 338 or 339.
Well, this is the state of the parties at 20-4. We've just heard that Enoch Powell is back in Down South, the official Unionist candidate. He didn't in the end have a challenge from Ian Paisley's Democratic Unionist Party, which it was thought he might have, so he had a straight run with the Protestant vote, and the SDLP vote isn't quite big enough there in Down South to take Enoch Powell out. So Enoch will return once again to the House of Commons. We may get that figure in just a moment. Perhaps at this point, we've only got a few more minutes to go. We should go over to Robin, who has one same guest and one, I can't see his guests from here, they've got their heads turned to me. Anyway, Robin.
Thank you very much indeed. May I just say something, gentlemen, which may sound a little sentimental. I don't know whether you think that is so, but it does seem to me at these moments that one of our great privileges is to live in a country where government changes hands so peacefully and good-humouredly, and where people like Shirley Williams or Teddy Taylor accept defeat with good grace, and isn't that the mark of a civilized democracy?
I agree.
Yes, it certainly is true, and I think that it is such a terrible moment to lose one's parliamentary seat. To see both of them, we have been today facing adversity with such courage and cheerfulness, is something worthwhile.
But Norman, sorry, all I was going to say is, but we spend a lot of time running ourselves down in this country by virtue of our system. It's not a bad thing to sit back occasionally and tell ourselves that there's something innately good. We don't do it enough.
And was it not very gracious and chivalrous of Mr. Callaghan in defeat to say, as he did, that for a woman to be the first to occupy the great office of Prime Minister was a great, or was it remarkable moment in the history of our people, Norman?
Yes, I do, and he was quite right. It is, because one of the things that's most important, I think, for the future is to have equality of the sexes, and the fact that we've got, for the first time, a woman Prime Minister is a great day for everyone.
What would you like to say by way of final comment on this? Because I haven't it in me to ask you any more questions, whether penetrating or otherwise. Merlin Rees?
Well, the Prime Minister said he wished the government well, but Parliament will start again the week after next. We'll be on the other side of the House, and then Her Majesty's official opposition will be at it, because that's the other side of our Constitution. So, Norman, watch it. We're going to be after you.
Norman?
Well, I look forward to resuming life in the House of Commons. It's one of the greatest of our institutions. Great nations, Robin, only fail when they cease to understand the institutions which they themselves have created. And you are one of our great national institutions as well.
If I may pass over that embarrassing comment, for which I'm much obliged, may I say, and I'm almost restrained from saying it in view of what you said, but I won't let flattery disarm me, you very nearly didn't get in yourself.
I know. I had a very tough struggle, but one of the most interesting things about that struggle, and I think of these other results we have seen, is that television is not the great defense that we think it is for politicians, but when the chips are down, what really matters is whether you have looked after your constituents or not, and that may just save you when the tide is running against you, although, as in the Shirley's case, the tide may be so strong that you're carried away anyhow.
And that's why I've driven down from Leeds today, and I will start at 9:30 tomorrow morning till 5 o'clock tomorrow evening with my surgeries, because that's what it's all about, and not just the television and the national swings.
Thank you, gentlemen, for putting television in perspective, and I hope you will agree we've done our humble best today.
Very much.
Bob, do you have a final comment? on the result of this election?
Well, I think it is, in the history books, all about the first time a woman in a modern, great Western democracy made a breakthrough. You know, it's odd, before democracy, women inherited great power. Elizabeth I, Catherine the Great of Russia, and all the rest. Democracy came along, and women weren't even allowed to vote for the first century of democracy. Then they were allowed to vote and got nowhere. And Mrs. Thatcher is the first woman in a modern Western democracy to get even in the inner circle of power, because there have been no foreign ministers in France, Germany, United States, anywhere else who've been women. One in Sweden, a woman was foreign minister. So that is the reason why this particular election will go into the history books and the international history. But there's a supreme irony. Although she becomes first woman leader of a Western democracy, the status of women in our parliament has slumped at this election to the lowest point in a quarter of a century. Any number of women have gone down. Shirley Williams, Winnie Ewing, Margaret Bain, Maureen Colgan, Audrey Wise, Helene Hayman. It's an astonishing fact. We're down to, I think, on a rough calculation, 18 women, and in 1945 there were more women than that in Parliament. So it is a supreme irony for women. They've made the breakthrough, and they've lost their foothold in Parliament to a really alarming degree.
David.
Well, let me make 3-4 quick assertions. One, the average of the opinion polls came out more or less right in terms of the answer. 2, the turnout was up substantially from previous times. 3, the swing was, in fact, over the country as a whole, surprisingly uniform in regions, but it was so much higher in the south, it was enough higher in the south than the north to make the crucial difference. The smallish difference between the north and the south cost the Labour Party the seats, which made the difference between Mrs. Thatcher just winning and winning a perfectly good working majority. But I don't want to end just making these kind of psephological, statistical notes. It seems to me that we've had the 4th change of government in the last 15 years. We're used to the alternation of government. So far, it has been rather a disillusioning experience. The sense of national decline has not, in fact, been increased by the sense we change governments, they give us a new panacea, and it doesn't actually cure the problem. One does hope and pray, without any political bias in this, that this time we may break out of it. We don't have one more cycle, and in 1984 we're waiting for a change of government and a new panacea to get us out of the thing. But I must say, I don't think that it'll be a rapid or fundamental change. I think government goes on, there's much more continuity in a nation. The new government is going to have the painful education of office once again of discovering how limited is the power of those who go into government. But all one can do at this moment is just to wish those who have this terrible burden put upon them the best of luck.
Thanks, David. Well, we're waiting for Mrs. Thatcher to come out of Buckingham Palace on her appointment as Prime Minister.
But she's not coming.
Kissing hands with the Queen, but we think perhaps she's not coming for the moment. She's been in there for some time. Oh, wait a moment. I think there she is. So Mrs. Thatcher is now the first woman Prime Minister of Great Britain and leaves Buckingham Palace. Few people apparently in the crowd noticing that she's there. But she's not there. That car was empty. Well, that just serves one right for launching into purple commentary on an empty motor car. In a moment, Mrs. Thatcher will be there, and we have news, just before we go, of the Tories taking Brecon and Radnorshire. I shall prevent David Butler commenting on that, since he's summed up so elegantly his view. It's perhaps a moment just to look at exactly where things stand now, the state of the parties, as we leave you. This is the position. We've had 619 seats out of the 635 declared, and there are 16 more to come, and this is how it's looking. And on that basis, this is what we are now firmly predicting at 4:15. The Conservatives, with an overall majority of 43, sufficient in all probability to give them a 5-year parliament. It's been a strange night and a strange day. We've seen many sad faces of people who've been defeated, Mr. Callaghan and others, but I suspect the Parliament ahead will be a tough one, because Mr. Callaghan it was who said that he thought this phase in the Tory leadership was only a passing phase. It was he who said, vote in haste, repent at leisure. And charitable as he is in wishing Mrs. Thatcher well and wishing her success when Parliament reassembles, no doubt the dialogue, if you can call it that, between the parties will start again. It was a disappointing campaign and a disappointing result for David Steel, because the Liberals, though they've got over the 4 million mark in the popular vote, have only got 10 MPs in the new Parliament, and they're back in that old conundrum that they can get the votes but they can't get the seats, and his hope of a People's Party with a wedge of Liberal MPs that would divide the two main parties have been dashed. But the person whose day of triumph, of course, it is Mrs. Thatcher, who came into Parliament in 1959, who served as Minister for Education between 1970 and 1974, her only experience in high office, who challenged Mr. Heath for the leadership of the Tory party and was rewarded for her courage by winning that leadership, and who all through this campaign has been presenting herself as a conviction politician, saying that she believes that this country, the people of this country, haven't been true to themselves, and that it's time for the whole climate to change, the climate that Mr. Callaghan, as she sees it, and Mr. Wilson before him, and there he is just leaving Transport House, that the kind of climate they have had has got to change. So that we are certainly in for some of the most fascinating political developments, starting with the state opening of Parliament, which is on May the 15th. We'll have the Queen's speech, we'll see what legislation the new Tory government is going to put through, and we'll have very shortly the first Tory budget. Well, that is all from us for the moment, and just before we go, I'd like to say goodbye to you, not only on behalf of all of us who've appeared on camera, but on behalf of many other people around the studio who've fed us with information and even occasionally with food. And thank you all for joining us from us on Decision 79. Good afternoon.
Well, that's where the programme ended in 1979, but in Downing Street there have been crowds ready to greet the new Prime Minister. Margaret Thatcher returned from the palace to a noisy reception and had some words of St. Francis of Assisi for the waiting journalists.
Good afternoon, Prime Minister. Good afternoon, Prime Minister. Hello. Have a word. Mrs. Thatcher. Mrs. Thatcher. Mrs. Thatcher. You just ask Mr. Philip, the BBC, Mrs. Thatcher. It's been a wonderful campaign for you. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
How do you feel at this moment?
Very excited, very aware of the responsibilities. Her Majesty, the Queen, has asked me to form a new administration, and I have accepted. It is, of course, the greatest honour that can come to any citizen in a democracy. I know full well the responsibilities that await me as I enter the door of number 10, and I'll strive unceasingly to try to fulfil the trust and confidence that the British people have placed in me and the things in which I believe. And I would just like to remember some words of St. Francis of Assisi, which I think are really just particularly apt at the moment. Where there is discord, may we bring harmony. Where there is error, may we bring truth. Where there is doubt, may we bring faith. And where there is despair, may we bring hope. And to all the British people, howsoever they voted, may I say this: now that the election is over, may we get together and strive to serve and strengthen the country of which we're so proud to be a part.
Prime Minister.
And finally, one last thing. In the words of Erin Eve, whom we had hoped to bring here with us, there is now work to be done.